controls. Since I gave my heart to Jesus, the longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. The more I love him, the love he bestows. Each day is like heaven, my heart overflows. The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. Every need he is supplying, plenteous grace he bestows. Every day my heart gets brighter, the longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. The more I love him, the love he bestows. Each day is like heaven, my heart overflows. The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. Amen. You may be seated. Oh, no, we got announcements. I'm sorry. I do not have a bulletin, actually. Oh, right here. Okay. Just so quick announcements here real quick before we have a missionary update. Looking forward to this coming Saturday. We will have church-wide outreach at 10 a.m. A great opportunity for us to go door knocking. And don't forget about the maps and the cards from your Sunday school class. We also have some out here in the foyer, so make sure you sign up to take one of those and just go invite people to Jesus, invite people to church. So, but this Saturday will be an opportunity for us to get together collectively as a church and do that from here. I'm looking forward to the 19th. We're going to have a conference during the evening service. We're also going to have some guest preachers from Heartland Baptist Bible College. They're going to be here to share the word with us. October 21st is Men's Night. Looking forward to that. And then towards the end of the month, on the 26th, we will have our Family Fall Festival on Sunday evening at 5 o'clock. So we're looking forward to that as well. I'm sure there'll be sign-up sheets and all that kind of stuff coming up in the near future. So, but that's all the announcement I have. And at this time,
Izin vermemişiz. Korkmuştum. Güzel gözüküyor.
Güvercin nerede?
Bu akşam prodüksiyon yapmayı unuttum. İzin vermemişiz protestaya. Güzel gözüküyor.
We will sing His eye is on the sparrow. Let's sing it out on all three verses. Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven home? Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. His tender words I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubt and fear. Though by the path He leadeth, but one step I may see. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Whenever I am tempted, whenever clouds arise, when songs give place to sighing, when hope within me dies, draw the closer to Him. From care He sets me free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and touches me. Amen.
All right, go ahead and find Psalm chapter number 17 and remain standing when you find it. If you're able to stand, we'll be in Psalm 17 tonight. We were going through Psalms in Sunday school, and for about 16 weeks is when we were in Psalms, and we worked one Psalm at a time. Others did a bunch at a time or hopped all around, but the youth boys did not. We just kind of stuck with it one at a time. We made it up to Psalm 16, and so I thought, well, let's just continue on with Psalm 17. It's been just really rewarding to be in the Psalms, and I think it fits well for an encouraging sermon for tonight. Psalm 17, it says, a prayer of David. That's a little unusual to be a prayer of David instead of a song. Hear the right, O Lord, attend unto my cry. Give ear unto my prayer that goeth not out of feigned lips. Let my sentence come forth from thy presence. Let thine eyes behold the things that are equal. Thou hast proved mine heart. Thou hast visited me in the night. Thou hast tried me, and shalt find nothing. I am purposed that my mouth shall not transgress. Concerning the works of men, by the word of thy lips, I have kept me from the paths of the destroyer. Hold up my goings in thy paths, that my footsteps slip not. I have called upon thee, for thou wilt hear me, O God. Incline thine ear unto me, and hear my speech. Show thy marvelous loving kindness, O thou that savest by thy right hand, them which put their trust in thee, from those that rise up against them. Keep me as the apple of thy eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. From the wicked that oppress me, from my deadly enemies who compass me about. They are enclosed in their own fat. With their mouth they speak proudly. They have now compassed us in our steps. They have set their eyes bowing down to the earth. Like as a lion that is greedy of his prey, and as it were a young lion lurking in secret places. Arise, O Lord, disappoint him, cast him down. Deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. From men which are thy hand, O Lord, from men of the world, which have their portion in this life, and whose belly thou fillest with thy hid treasure. They are full of children, and leave the rest of their substance to their babes. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Lord, bless the reading of his word. You may be seated. So here we find David is obviously seeking God for some help in a situation. And it kind of reminds us of others that seek help in situations of their life and they are unable to find it for one reason or another. Traditionally, if there's a big dispute, if there's a big trial with someone, you would go to court, maybe not everyone, but in some cases. And then there's federal courts, and then you work your way up to the Supreme Court. And I've got a news brief today from the Pour Over, which we read. It comes in our email. It's a Christian news brief, and they mentioned a little bit about the Supreme Court today. Maybe you heard a little bit about them yourself. So on Monday, the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, they did a lot of things. They rejected one appeal case for an Epstein associate against trafficking convictions. Then they declined to revive conservative activist Laura Loomer's lawsuit alleging Twitter or X conspired to censor conservative political speech. This is what our Supreme Court is up to. They denied Google's request to block court-mandated Play Store changes which would have benefited third-party apps. The Supreme Court yesterday began hearing arguments on whether states can prohibit counseling services designed to change a child's same-sex attraction, also called conversion therapy. Major medical groups say the practice can be harmful. A Christian counselor says her talk therapy is protected free speech. Now, obviously, that's a big issue there, isn't it? We all know how we want that to go. It would be detrimental, no doubt, if the Supreme Court didn't land correctly on that. Other cases this term that the Supreme Court is taking up includes challenges to President Trump's ability to impose tariffs, limiting birthright citizenship, and in a case where Lisa Cook, a federal board member, was fired. So that's a lot that goes on with the Supreme Court justice, and some of this stuff comes obviously not from my knowledge and memory of history in high school. I looked it up, and there's other reputable websites that mention things like this. So for a case to go all the way to the Supreme Court, have you ever thought about what that takes? You hear about these cases that they accept or they deny, but what does that actually involve? So for a new case to be brought before the Supreme Court, it has to first be brought to a district court. So that's the lowest court in the nation's court system. We're going somewhere with this, so just kind of stay tuned. So altogether, there are 94 district courts in the United States. And in 2024, those district courts heard 285,000 cases. So most cases begin and end just right there in district courts. But and the way this works is that you've got a single judge, and he presides over each case, and it's either decided by him or by the jury, but somebody wins and someone loses in every one of these cases. Now, if the loser doesn't like how all of that came down, then he can appeal to the district judge's ruling and have the next level of court, the Court of Appeals, look at the case. So there's a map up here that's going to show there's 13 Circuit Court of Appeals in all. 12 are geographic circuits, and then one of them is a federal. And so obviously ours is number 10. You hear a lot about the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. You'll notice a lot of that happens in California. That's where most of this stuff comes from. I didn't know that until I looked into some of this today. So if someone appeals their case to this court, the judge has to decide on it and will either say that the district court got it right, or they will say that the district court got it wrong. This is the appeals court judge talking. They'll explain why and reach a new decision. So someone wins again and someone loses at this district court. The loser of an appeals court can then try, if he doesn't like that, he can then try to get the Supreme Court to hear the case. They have to file something that's called a petition for a writ of certiorari, if I'm saying that right, and that goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. My wife and I saw this building in 2012 when we made our trip to Washington, D.C. So on average, the Supreme Court gets 10,000 petitions every year. Now, for them to accept a case, you've got to have 4 out of the 9 Supreme Court judges that decide that it has merit before they issue a legal order from the high court to the lower court for the records to be sent to them for review. So every year, on average, the Supreme Court will hear 65 to 70 cases. Most cases are denied. Obviously, if you're only hearing about 70 of the 10,000 cases that are brought up. So our Supreme Court justices, we've got this on the midweek live stream. So if you're joining us online, you've already seen a picture like this and the picture of the Supreme Court, because we ought to be praying for our Supreme Court and the justices of our land here. So this is from the front row, left to right, Associate Justice Sotomayor, Associate Justice Thomas. Then you have Chief Justice Roberts, Associate Justice Alito Jr., and Associate Justice Kagan. On the back row, from left to right, you've got Associate Justice Barrett, Associate Justice Gorsuch, Associate Justice Kavanaugh, and Associate Justice Jackson. These are the 9 judges that preside. It's not a single judge that hears the Supreme Court cases, but 9 of them. One of them is the Chief Justice, and that's Honorable John G. Roberts, and he's the 17th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. So there's been 104 associate judges in court's history. There's probably more than what you wanted to hear. The point is this, that out of the 285 district court cases, there is a 0.025% possibility that it's going to end up being heard by the Supreme Court of the United States. And out of the 10,000 petitions that the Supreme Court hears each year, there is a 0.7% possibility that it will be heard by the Supreme Court justice. So out of the mass majority of them, they don't even hear them, but even the ones that go up from appeals and then they try to petition the Supreme Court, they only hear 0.7% of all the possible cases. And they turn away a lot of these cases. So there are times when a judge gets it wrong. A case has to be brought to the appeals court, and then it's brought to the Supreme Court. During last year's term, the Supreme Court reversed 74.6% of all the cases that it reviewed. It's pretty amazing. That's almost 3/4. Years gone by, it averages like 71%. But this past year, almost 3 out of every 4 decisions that the Supreme Court reviewed, they were able to turn that over and say, no, we really feel that according to the Constitution, this appeals court didn't judge correctly. The district court didn't handle it right. And so they're able to go through this very long, arduous process. And if you've got a situation here that's big enough, then there's a chance. There's a very small chance that it might be heard. The average, again, is 0.025% of a possibility that that'll end up in the Supreme. Not very good odds at all. Not at all. In Psalm 17, David is here, and he's appealing to his judge. He's appealing because he is overwhelmed by the oppression of the enemy. Look at verse number 9. This really gets where he gets into some of the issues that he's facing. He says, from the wicked that oppress me, from my deadly enemies who compass me about. They are enclosed in their own fat. With their mouth they speak proudly. They have now compassed us in our steps. They have set their eyes bowing down to earth, like as a lion that is greedy of his prey, as it were a young lion lurking in secret places. Arise, O Lord, disappoint him, cast him down, deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. From men which are thy hand, O Lord, from men of the world, which have their portion in this life, and whose belly thou fillest with thy hid treasure. They are full of children, and leave the rest of their substance to their babes. Now, there's a lot of conversation that goes back and forth on commentators as far as when this happened and when it didn't happen. It's hard to pin down an exact time when this could have happened, but I think we can all agree that if we know the life of David, there was a lot of times when David could have written this. It wasn't just like a one time that he had this one bad day where he had to cry out to God like this. I think of the times that he experienced jealousy from King Saul and how that turned into persecution as Saul would try to kill David and forced him to become a fugitive. David also had some internal problems. He had sinned with Bathsheba, and then he murdered her husband. And then he suffered the consequences of those sins. David's family had other problems. Amnon violated his half-sister Tamar. Absalom avenged Tamar and murdered Amnon. And he would later rebel against David and also conspire to overthrow David. That led to Absalom's death and an insurmountable amount of grief for David that he had to deal with. David faced plagues, fightings, turmoil, grief. David also wrote in Psalm 34, verse 19, many are the afflictions of the righteous. He says, the Lord delivereth them out of them all, but that first part is so key for us to understand. That many times the wicked gathered around him and sought his destruction. David was a man that was well associated with traumatic events, types of abuse, with exhaustion, with facing issues that were just too large for him. In verse 11, Saul was hunting David. Some people think that this was the time when Saul was hunting David, and that they had surrounded a mountain that David was taking refuge in. And he goes and just talks about how he's being hunted in that way. In verse number 12, he talks about how it's like a lion that is greedy of his prey. And David had seen what a lion could do to a sheep. It's not a pretty picture that the shepherds were well acquainted with. In verse number 14, David understands that the wicked seem to prosper and have plenty. It talks about how that they're enclosed and they're fat and they have enough for their kids. So what that kind of implies is that they leave almost like an early inheritance to their children because they're just so successful and prosperous. Good is happening to the evil, and evil is happening to the good people. There are times in Israel's history and in our history that judges don't get it right. That evil goes on unpunished. In fact, that evil goes on rewarded. Even our Supreme Court doesn't always get it right every time. Not everything in this life goes right. In fact, even without a Supreme Court, in just our normal everyday lives, it seems that there are times when life just gets to be too much to handle and there's stress, and we're kind of at our wits' end. So what do you do when life gets to be that way? How do you cope? I think everyone in here, as I kind of look around, maybe with the exception of the little kids, I mean, all of us have had big situations in our life, bigger than what we are capable of handling. There's the way that the world handles them, and it helps us understand some things maybe about others, if not ourselves, and how they deal with issues. When someone comes to a problem that is too big for them to handle themselves, sometimes they'll turn to substance abuse. So you've got things like alcohol, nicotine, sleep medication. All these things are ways that people cope with problems. Stimulants like cocaine, Ritalin, over-caffeination. I mean, sometimes people are just depending upon their coffee, and that's not necessarily bad, but it can become too much of a bad thing if we become over-dependent on them. There's ways that the world can remove our pain through different ways, like opioids and drugs, and maybe we all know someone that's suffered with those addictions. They can change your senses through hallucinogens and cannabis. These things at times might be medically necessary in some extreme situations, right? Proverbs 31 talks about that. But addictions, listen, they're everywhere. And you say, well, I'm not addicted to cocaine. At least I don't know of anyone here that is. Or maybe you say, well, I can kind of cope with these some other ways than just with substance abuse. There's not just substance abuse in ways that we cope with life. Other ways we cope with life have to do with our behavior as well. There's some people that when life just gets too much, maybe you know someone that just heads off to the casino so they can gamble because they just need a little bit of a break. Some people, we try to distance ourselves from our issues by gaming, by shopping, by overeating, by over-exercising. I don't know anyone that does that, but some people do. We oversleep. We look at things like pornography and see that as a release. We overwork sometimes. There's excessive times or an inappropriate amount of time we might spend on social media. And all those ways are ways that we try to cope with our problems too. Maybe we just try to forget it all and just watch some entertainment for hours and hours and hours, more than what we ought to. When under the pressures and the injustices of life, in Psalm 17, David shows us that we don't have to depend on the world system of coping. All those things could go away. I don't know that David had any of those options in front of him. Maybe he could have over-exercised or over-ate, but by and large, he realized that he has direct access to the supreme judge, to the supreme court of all. Look at verse number 1 and 2. As he writes, a prayer of David, hear the right, O Lord, attend unto my cry. Give ear unto my prayer that goeth not out of vain lips. Let my sentence come forth from thy presence. See how he's appealing to a higher court there? Let thine eyes behold the things that are equal. David asked God to listen to his prayer. It's like he's praying so that God would hear when he's praying to him. It's like he's preparing for this. He prays that his prayer would be accepted. I don't know if you've ever been in a place where you felt like you needed to pray that prayer before. You say, Lord, I've got things going on here, and sometimes it seems that I don't have any good communication with God, that my prayer life maybe isn't all that it should be. So, Lord, would you please hear my prayer? And David was in the exact same place. God delights in hearing the prayers of his children. Proverbs 15, verse 8 says, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. Isn't that incredible to think that God takes delight when people pray, when the righteous, when his children pray to him? That delights God. God doesn't get overwhelmed by our problems. We do. So David asked the judge, God, he asked that God would judge him first before he judges the situation. Now again, remember the Supreme Court. It's like if you had direct access to Amy Coney Barrett, and maybe you had a line that you could text or message her on and say, yeah, I need you to pick up this case for me, because we understand whatever the Supreme Court says, it's settled and it's done and it's final, and there's no appealing the Supreme Court. I understand that God is the supreme judge. So look at verse number 3, what David requests. He says, thou hast proved mine heart, and hast visited me in the night. Thou hast tried me, and shalt find nothing. I am purposed that my mouth shall not transgress. Concerning the works of men, by the word of thy lips, I have kept me from the paths of the destroyer. God often helps us before he helps us with our situation. Can I say that again? Oftentimes, when we're in a situation where it's just too much, he uses situations to show us how far we've really come from our relationship with God. God is good like that. He can take something bad, a bad situation, and all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purposes. And we know from experience, don't we, that whenever we go to seek God about a crisis in our life, God says, hold on, let's work on our relationship first. God can help us overcome addictions. God can help us overcome problems. But we must first come to a place where we realize that we need to be right with God first off. And secondly, where we realize that we desperately need God. Listen to the language of verse 5 through 7. Listen to how David is depending upon God. He says, hold up my goings in thy paths, that my footsteps slip not. I have called upon thee, for thou wilt hear me. O God, incline thine ear unto me, and hear my speech. Show thy marvelous loving kindness, O thou that savest by the right hand, them which put their trust in thee from those that rise up against them. I understand what he's saying there in verse number 5. He's saying, I'm trusting in God. Hold up my goings in thy path. In other words, he's saying, Lord, I really need you to hold me up here. And then in verse number 7, he's saying that thou savest by thy right hand them which put their trust in thee from those that rise up against them. So the question is, who does God save? Who does God deliver? God delivers those that trust in him. Which implies that if there is not a full and complete trust in God in an everyday situation, then God is not necessarily obligated to just come through and deliver. Before he brings deliverance, he wants to bring you to a place where you're trusting in God. God is big enough to help with life and with life's problems, but God saves those that put their trust in him, according to verse number 7. So we have to ask, are we trusting God for deliverance? You say, well, I'm not going through a situation right now. You know, can you maybe look back to a time in your life? Maybe it was something in your own life, something in someone else's life, and you're really calling out to God and really needing God to come through on this, where you're saying, if God doesn't help me through this, then there's no hope at all. We get there during the crisis, but we ought to be there with God even on the good days. We tend to tell ourselves that we're trusting in God when oftentimes our tendency is to tell ourselves we're trusting in God, but we just cope with our problems through these other addictions that we have or other behaviors that we have. God, we save the prayer card for the big events. I'll never hopefully forget what Dr. Cook used to say when someone would be counseling, and he would be leading someone in counseling, rather, and they came to a desperate situation. And finally the counselee would say, I think we just need prayer right now. There's nothing else we can do. And Dr. Cook would say, well, has it come to that now? Or something along those lines. It's funny, and he would use that in other situations as well. But it's true that we think that we can just kind of handle this on our own. There's little problems here. There's little addictions we have here that maybe we think we can handle these things, but we'll save the big cases for the Supreme Court. We'll save our big life problems for the Supreme Judge of all. We cope with so many things in our own ability that sometimes it takes a larger trial. It takes a larger problem for us to realize that we're not as close to God as we ought to be. We need to keep God as our hope and our trust. Ultimately, David says here in verse number 8, keep me as the apple of thine eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. I think this is really what God wanted for David. For David to understand that more important than deliverance was his distance from God. The apple of thy eye, or the apple of the eye, it has to do with the pupil of your eye. So if I had Malachi come up here, and I'm not going to do this. We would do this in karate all the time. But like, have you ever just had someone throw something at you and like you flinch? Has that ever happened before? We're like, typically the first reaction is what? You kind of bring your hands up, right? If I picked up a hymnal and just threw it at you, what would you naturally do? Shall we find out? No, I'm just kidding. You can sit down. I appreciate the willingness there. It's what happens whenever you're about to, you see something coming at your face. You normally don't like protect your knees all of a sudden, or your hearts. No, our natural reaction, the moment we sense danger that's coming at us, as we hold our hands up and protect our face, right? Maybe there's a car wreck you can see coming. You're like, ah! Maybe your son threw something at your face, and you're like, ah! And you want to block your face so that nothing hits your eye. That's how you perceive things, is through your eye. And we find that just a natural instinct is to protect our eye. And David says here, keep me, protect me, guard me as the apple of the eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. There's a picture here that just illustrates this so well. We don't have any brooding chickens at our house, but we have plenty of chickens. And maybe you've seen this before, where I've seen it, to be honest, is during a thunderstorm, right? You've got little bitty chicks, and you've got a larger hen that's been brooding, and she's raised these little chicks, and she deals with them and raises them as she does. But whenever there's something that's terrifying, like a flash of lightning and the boom of thunder, and that chicken is able to get those chicks and hide them under her wings. And that's what David said. Through all of this, that this is what God was teaching him, that the protection of God, that the protection that God provides is not found in distancing ourselves from the problem. The way that we cope with life isn't by finding some way to escape the pressures or the stresses of life. It's important that we rest and that we have time of refreshment. But the real issue that David is learning here is that God's protection isn't found in distancing from the problem, but rather it's found in closeness to God. Believers don't find relief in the calm. We find it in Christ. There are times when God calms the storm. More often than not, God is interested in calming us and saying, why don't we talk about how that we're not as close as we thought we were. You've got all these other issues in life that you feel like you've been handling. And really what God desires is much like a chicken or a hen with her chicks, there's just a closeness there. Can you spiritually envision that with you? You're not the mama chick, you're the baby chick, right? That we haven't got this figured out. There's little things that scare baby chicks, and they frighten quite easily here. And David's desire ultimately is that he would be hid under the shadow of thy wings, that more than anything else, he just wants to be close to God. The very last verse 15, he says, as for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. See how he's talking about just wanting to be close to God? We even know that sometimes some have applied this verse to death and waking up with Christ's likeness there in heaven. But understand that the truth that David has discovered here is that when life is overwhelming, when there's a prayer just for a prayer, that Lord, that you would hear my prayer. When I can't cope with the issues of life, no matter what they be, we don't find relief in ignoring the problems or coping with them the way that we have often done before. We don't ignore the problems. We have to understand that God is our solution. He's our protection. He is what we ought to be drawing close to. I think what David understood is that maybe not the natural reaction, not our tendency to find shelter or escape or some sort of activity or behavior that helps us feel better. That's not the way that Christians deal with the issues and the pressures of life. Rather, we find protection and safety in our closeness to God. From that perspective, we can really see that the trials of life that God brings our way, they're really instruments of God to bring us closer to Him. The traumatic things that our life has brought our way and will bring our way inevitably in the future, through all of this, like the lightning, sometimes it takes a giant boom of thunder for the chicks to run back and say, this is where I need to be. Not escaping the situation, but drawing close to God. Father, we're thankful for your word.
Lately I've been looking back along this